Hello everyone, we are running 5 minutes late, which is kind of okay for the day we had already. And I'm happy to present the panel, which is named A Man Who Is Not a Man, Masculinities. We have an apology by Siseko Kumalo and Lindo Kuhlegama. They actually are supposed to be, their paper is supposed to be read by Janine Jones, who is a little bit AWOL right now. So we are trying to track Janine to come in at the end. So right now we will start with Marjorie. The title is An Exploration of Manhood, Sexuality and Culture in Thando Mqolozana's A Man Who Is Not a Man and John Trengove's Inxeba. Sorry for all the mispronunciations.
Hi everyone.
Hi Maud.
Okay, so my paper is an extract from my long paper. So I won't be presenting on Inxeba, the wound, but I will be focusing on Thando Mqolozana's A Man Who's Not a Man. Also, just before I go through my paper, I just want to apologize if I don't pronounce anything properly. Yeah, okay. So, when Thando Mqolozana published his debut novel, A Man Who's Not a Man, in 2009, it received heavy backlash. Critics felt that Mqolozana's text, which relays the story of the boat circumcision of a young Xhosa initiate, Bloem, exposed and disrespected Xhosa culture by making public and controversial what is viewed as a private and sacred ethnic custom and practice. The Xhosa ritual of male circumcision, referred to as Ulwaluko in isiXhosa, is viewed as a long-standing custom amongst the amaXhosa that marks a transition from boyhood to manhood. Traditional Xhosa initiation is seen as a requirement for being recognized as a man in the community. The ritual takes place in a secluded area away from the public, specifically a mountain or bush school. The boys are expected to endure the hardships they encounter during this period, particularly the physical pain from the wound, which symbolizes warriorhood. In this way, traditional circumcision is rendered an agent of socialization, intended to introduce the initiate to the realities of manhood within an amaXhosa context, and in which seclusion, suffering, and pain broadly represent the trials of life. The successful completion of Ulwaluko socializes the boy into the community, and most significantly, signals his entrance into manhood by marking him as man enough to endure any hardships he may encounter when he's released back into the society. In this respect, initiation rituals like Ulwaluko, as depicted in A Man Who's Not a Man, promote specific ideals of masculinity, as initiates are expected to withstand pain, have physical strength, be emotionally robust, and be able to provide and protect the family. Thus, it could be argued that Ulwaluko, albeit providing a valuable space and resource for identitarian and communitarian socialization, also reproduces heteronormative ideals of masculinity, in which manhood is determined by the fulfillment of social expectations in the years post-initiation. In this way, initiation rituals risk reinforcing patriarchal gender norms that perpetuate and inscribe dangerous gender binaries, thus undermining the possibilities of multifaceted, diverse forms of manhood. Although Mqolozana challenges the toxic masculinity boys are taught and expected to adhere to during initiation, he not only received backlash for revealing to the public what ought to remain sacred, but for misrepresenting what actually takes place during Ulwaluko. A common complaint that keeps recurring in the public's responses to the novel is that this work is based on fictionalized events that falsify and disrespect the Xhosa ritual. In this regard, the South African public appears not only distressed with the content in the novel, it is critical of the mode of representation being used to discuss this issue. In a close analysis of Mqolozana's A Man Who's Not a Man, this paper will explore the dynamics of male subjectivity within the context of South African culture, that is, Xhosa ideologies of hypermasculinity, in line with the critical readings of African creatives as not merely intellectuals whose work mirror or can be used to mirror social thought, but as social thinkers themselves whose work engages and questions heteronormative identity and subjectivity. This paper will examine the efficacy of Mqolozana's artistic mode in transformatively disrupting South African culture and ideological norms. The novel A Man Who's Not a Man follows Lumkile Chris Vumindaba Dlamini as he transitions through circumcision from boyhood into manhood. The narrative is a buildings roman told in the first-person point of view. In the prologue, Lumkile asserts to the reader that the story is about how he came to have an abnormal penis. His is a story that unveils what happens to the Bakweta initiates whose circumcision fails on the mountain. As a survivor of septic circumcision, Lumkile hopes that by telling his story, he will be able to save other young men who have undergone similar traumatic experiences. He hopes to break the shroud of silence surrounding septic circumcision that buries the identity of its victims and depicts them as mere statistics and not human beings who have little or no control over what happens to them. The narrator's painful ordeal begins during the transitional phase of Xhosa initiation. This period during the process of initiation is significant because it tests a boy's ability to endure pain. The initiate is expected to heal during this phase, but bearing in mind that how he responds to the pain should adhere to the principles of Xhosa masculinity. One must not cry, one must not express pain in any way, otherwise he'll be perceived as fragile. One must conceal any emotions in order to be considered a true man. Lastly, and most importantly, in the case of Lumkile, one is expected to heal naturally and properly in order to have successfully completed the ritual and be held victorious in his journey towards manhood. Although Lumkile describes the pain from his circumcision as a shocking pain that hits him like electrocution, he contains his emotions because he is abiding to the protocols of hegemonic masculinity. He reminds himself that a real man does not give up or break down. As a real man, you do what you are supposed to do to see it through, without the dependency on others. You hold on with tenacity until the process is complete. That's the important lesson. Clearly, Lumkile is complicit with the dominant standards of masculinity expressed by the adult males in his community. As mentioned by Robert Morel et al., hegemonic masculinity, being the dominant form of masculinity practiced by certain cultures, silences other masculinities so that the values expressed do not have currency or legitimacy. Thus, when the pain from Lumkile's limb becomes unbearable, a sign that the wound has been infected, he remains silent because showing any sign of weakness will earn him the label failed man. The rot in Lumkile's penis is a result of the negligence of the adult Xhosa males in his life. His grandfather and uncle are absent throughout most of the initiate's transition phase. Lumkile's grandfather is incapable of helping him because he's drunk, while his uncle negates his responsibility to go sheep shearing. Due to the lack of guidance and improper training, Lumkile tightens the bandage of his wound, which results in the deformity of the limb. Still respecting the guidelines of hegemonic masculinity, Lumkile does not call for assistance. He considers it a man's duty to remain strong and see this process through to the end. The narrator chooses to remain silent. He also hesitates to explore other alternative forms of assistance because of his faith in the process. In other words, he is waiting for the government-appointed nurse to visit his hut. Lumkile's severed wound symbolizes the failure of hegemonic masculinity as attempts by members of his family and the community to facilitate the transition from boyhood to manhood are half-hearted at best. A man who is not a man cannot simply be read as a text that gives the reader a glimpse into the sacred tradition of Ululuko. It also does not only depict the negative effects traditional ideals of masculinity have on an initiate. Instead, the author also attempts to show that the process of healing for the failed man should not be a journey he goes through on his own. It should be a collective effort. The elders ought to take responsibility for their negligence. The failed man is a product of their mistakes, and he should not be ostracized but allowed to be a man in his own right. This is evident with Lumkile's uncle, Umdan, who helps the initiate through this process of healing. Umdan asserts to Lumkile that a man is a man for his strategy, alluding to the idea that it is Lumkile's perseverance on the mountain and courage to seek for help when he realizes what's happening to his limb, that makes him a man. Dan's remark is significant because it helps put things into perspective for the veiled man. Up to this point in the text, Lumkile has kept his head down in shame, unable to look into the eyes of his elders because he does not have their respect. Dan, however, represents an adult, closer, malleable, and subversive masculinity. He does what most men in Lumkile's life have failed to do, which is to acknowledge and attempt to rectify his mistakes. He challenges tradition by recognizing the failed man as a real man. This he does by asking the initiate to look him in the eye. Keep your head up because I need you to look me through. The elders' courageous actions to the failed initiate shift the blame from Lumkile and plant it on the custodians of Ululuko. The South African public response to A Man Who Is Not a Man. Thando Mqolozana's text, upon release, was received with mixed reviews from its readers. Majority of the public responses within South Africa were negative and called for the novel to be banned. Drawing on reader response theory, the section of the paper will examine how the reader's culture affiliations had an impact on how they received A Man Who Is Not a Man. Reader response theorists and researchers investigate the experience of reading and the complex interplay of reader text context, especially concerning texts that are identified as literary, imaginative, or fictional. In regard to this paper, reader response theory is significant because it provides insight into the readers of a biographical text like Mqolozana's, which uses a sensitive culture practice as its backdrop. Reader response theory examines how factors such as gender, race, social class, and history are interwoven with the activity of reading. Louise Rosenblatt, who academically formulated reader response theory, argues that a written mark does not have the same meaning for all readers. She asserts that each individual brings background knowledge, belief values, culture expectations, and reading context to the act of reading. Based on this argument, one could argue that closer readers of Mqolozana's novel will feel disrespected by the revelation of what happens during closer male circumcision through a work of fiction because it's their culture belief that this ritual is sacred. For some global readers who reside outside of South Africa or not among closer South African readers, the novel can be seen as a significant conversation starter into the practice of Ululuko and the notions of masculinity taught within this space. As put forward by Nokhlakla Dlamini, the novel simply offers an insider's view of closer initiation to a global audience. On the other hand, the other half of Mqolozana's audience, consisting mostly of closer readers, perceive the text as a disrespectful remark on their culture. This interpretation of the text has little to do with the content, but the simple fact that the author has dared to discuss Ululuko in a public space. This issue was addressed when A Man Who Is Not a Man debuted at the Grahamstown National Arts Festival in the Eastern Cape. During the press briefing, a closer man said that he felt the urge to come forward and smack Mqolozana for daring to share the sacred practice of Ululuko through a public medium like a novel. For this reader, Mqolozana crossed the line by revealing the practices of this ritual to women and the uninitiated, thus lifting the veil of secrecy that the custom has constantly tried to protect. The exclusion of women from closer initiation carries a culture and social significance. The veil of secrecy serves to maintain the status quo. Thus, if women, for example, have access to this space, the hegemonic dominance of closer men will be threatened. Hence, in agreement with Anderson, this paper argues that the very act of reading has an ethical dimension. Reading involves doing things such as judging, desiring, emoting, actions that are linked to our values. Evidently, and as shown through the response from readers above, individuals who have been raised within this culture, closer culture, and understand the shroud of silence will potentially distance themselves from this text because it goes against their values. For Mqolozana, A Man Who Is Not a Man is not meant to demonize Ululuko. It is the shroud of silence surrounding the ritual that he intends to critique. In an interview with the Mail and Guardian, the author asserts that this silence that is upheld in the name of protecting the ritual from women uninitiated, and outsiders is dangerous because it has given license to a culture to kill and kill someone. As an initiated Xhosa man, Mqolozana feels that he has earned the right to break the silence and starts a debate of reconstruction. The author sees it as his duty to challenge certain culture norms through a fictive narrative, even though this is the culture he identifies with. Based on the above remarks, the issue of silence and masculinity within the context of Ululuko is something close to the author's heart. Despite the backlash received from his novel, Mqolozana continues his attempt at deconstructing the shroud of silence that surrounds masculine identity within Xhosa circumcision. This time, he transitions from literature to film.
Thank you for that. Our next speaker is Joy Joseph. The title is Exploitation, the White Black Woman in Mariama Bar's Chant, Ecarlate. I hope I pronounced that one.
Good afternoon, everyone. I already have my abstract. Let me quickly say that this research is contextual. We're looking at the West African culture, Yoruba down Senegal, and like what the director said this morning, Mariama Ba is one of the prolific authors in French studies, French studies, literature, African literature, stroke gender studies, and this is just a minute section of my PhD thesis that I'm trying to click. And let me appreciate a man who has helped me through. The presenter here, he used to, when you beat me, I run to him. Beat me here, I go to Asfour. We do some things there, and he's been very supportive. Thank you very much. Now, we are looking at Cornell's theory of hegemonic masculinity, which describes the dominant position of man and the subordinate position of women, but that I'm so looking at the theory of Stiwanism, and it says that, which I've already explained now, according to Simone de Beauvoir, she says that the woman is considered inferior to the man. Now, in some parts of West Africa, the woman is seen as a necessary evil. This is portrayed in Yoruba, probably says, for let me explain. A woman is an agent of any kind of evil. And I want to explain. What that means is, instead of having an empty room, just put a woman there. That is according to the Yoruba culture. And she says she's also seen as an object and not a subject. And I put it in inverted commas, object, subject, of course you know what that means. Which is portrayed in another Yoruba probably says, there is no human being. I'm explaining it literally. There is no human being. That is why a woman is made a king. So you see that it's a patriarchal society where the woman is completely dominated. And then in this book, the title of the book is Ancient Ecarlate. It means scarlet song in English. You have a situation where Usman is from a Muslim background. He got a French government scholarship from Senegal. He traveled to France, pretended to fall in love with a white woman, brought her back to Senegal and made her go crazy. And that's what you're going to be seeing in this book. I'm sure you're laughing, but we're looking at, you know what we are looking at. Please excuse my style, I'm different. Now you see, the first thing started with the love relationship. This looks real. This was what he was actually pretending. The love affair between Usman, you can see a black, and then a white woman. Why did I bring this book? This is not exactly a depiction of here our society where you have white, black, you have racial discrimination, and like I said, I look at the challenges of the African woman, female genital mutilation, sterility, unwanted pregnancy, domestic violence, polygamy, and all the things, abortion and all that. So he says he pretended to have fallen in love with Mireille, the daughter of a French ambassador. Usman was an opportunist. He was only interested in her beauty as well as the wealth he could derive from her. He says, oui, je suis un amoureux fou d'un diplomate français. I'm a mad lover of a child of a French diplomat. That's to tell you that he was not actually in love. Mireille fell in love with Usman, with Usman, which led to her pitfall for the rest part of her life. Now, Mireille's father, who was a diplomat, Jean de la Vallée, called Mireille's attention to Usman's techniques. That is in French. He referred to Usman as ça, and he says, ça means this. He says, tu connais bien ça? Do you know this thing? That is the way Mireille's father described Usman. Do you know this thing? Tu connais bien ça? And for Mireille, who was a white man, she said, ça était important dans ma vie. This black man, is very important in my life, but of course it was the opposite. Now the first thing Usman did was change of taste, conversion from Christianity to Islam. Like I said, Senegal, you have Islam and you have Christianity, but you have more of the other religion than Christianity. So what he did was systematically and strategically changed her from, she was a Christian, converted her from being a Christian to a Muslim, and said Usman gradually asked her to start putting up a Muslim hijab as opposed to her normal way of dressing. This was quite challenging, but she accepted. She said, "L'habit religieux que tu me proposes ne me va pas mieux, mais je l'endosse. What you're asking me to do, it's not a problem, but I would accept it." That's to tell you that she was not actually willing to, but she had to for the love, in quotes, that she had for Muriel. Now, he also insisted on conversion from Christianity to Islam for marital purposes. He said, okay, so if you're in love with me, you must change your religion. Of course, she changed. But the father kept saying, and she said, Marjorie est responsable, j'ai épousé à l'état civil, puis à la mosquée de notre vie, après avoir embrassé la religion islamique Usman. You can see, old and responsible, I married Usman in the mosque after I had to convert from Islam to Christianity. Now, the father kept calling her attention. Are you sure of what you're doing? But that's the exploitation we are talking about in this book. Now, finally, they got married. Of course, they had to leave France and come to Senegal. And I want to say in very clear terms, that is a pure patriarchal society because Islam is the dominant religion. And I'm sorry to say in quote, it's a religion of, okay, we'll talk about that. Don't want to say it. Then the first thing is, where in our culture, if a mother-in-law does not want you, we advise you not to get along with the man. You see, my name is Joy Joseph. Joseph is actually my husband's name. It's not, you change. So here, he brings a white woman to the house. And this woman was chewing, this is chewing stick, early in the morning. Now she walks into the house and messing up all the whole place, which of course was getting this woman angry. And that's why we're saying a man who is not a man. Instead of Usman to call the mother's attention or try to educate her, he says, tu vois que je t'ai dit ça Yaya Kadi de se curer les dents ici, Paris le tapis. You want me to stop Yaya Kadi? Yaya Kadi is the mother. To stop chewing her tree stick, to hell with the carpet. That's to tell you oppression, hegemonic masculinity. And then they had problem of language. They could not communicate. Remember that she is purely a French woman. She has no idea of the Wolof language, and everything was force. And she said, when they had a problem, she said, apprends vite le Wolof, put on sortie. That is, just study this language and get out of it. Don't disturb me about language barrier, which goes beyond, it wasn't the language, there were other hiding, in quote, things that was just behind the scene, and they used language. So that's why I was saying a man who is not a man. And she said, il ne s'agit pas de l'interdire, il s'agit d'éduquer. It's not about stopping mama, it's about educating her. Of course, he refused. And then we go ahead to see interferences from external people, friends, family, and neighbors. Usman had no control over family members, friends, and neighbors. There were constant conflicts. Family members visited the house constantly, messed up the place, and made life miserable for Muriel, who cried continuously in her closet. Why was she crying? This is a French woman who is not used to such communal life that we live. And she said, les copains doucement en visite fréquente par curiosité ou par amitié, traînant dans le salon, l'activité et l'ennui. Muriel s'énervait dans la cuisine. When you say s'énervait, she was getting angry in the kitchen because she was not used to anybody coming to the house making some, and sorry to say, some of us Africans were very loud, and you can see me, I'm even part of it, but I'm changing. I'm gradually changing, I'm changing, I'm changing. I hope I change. So she could not cope. Of course, the cultures are not the same. We're talking about racial discrimination, we're talking about different cultures here, and we're saying educate, but it was the opposite. So she was seen as a woman who was not hospitable. She was seen as a hostile woman and was hated by members of Usman's family. It was not a problem to Usman, who was seen as maître de sa maison. For Usman, it's not a problem. I am the owner of my house and I will do whatever I want to do. Now, you have here cheating. Oh, okay, that's where polygamy comes in. Okay, cheating. You can see it here with Usman, and then this is a woman who loved with all her heart. Please don't love with your heart. You know, love passion. I know I'm serious. I know this is a conference. Don't mind me. Do not love with your heart, because you can see here she was in love. I know that this is actually a literary text, but she says she was in love, but the man had Olimatu, another woman outside the house, which the white woman did not know. Now she says, and his friends tried to call his attention to, like, this is what you are doing, it's not right. He says, pourquoi la tromper? Je peux bien épouser une négresse, je suis musulman, ma femme également. I'm not cheating on her. I can as well give back and marry a black woman. I am a Muslim, and my wife too. The fact that his religion accepts that he should do that kind of a thing, he feels, well, I can do whatever I like, not putting the woman's personality, her emotions into consideration. And he says, on épousant un homme, on épouse aussi sa manière de vivre. When you marry a man, you marry everything about him. Yeah. Yes, that's what you have there. You can say, I'm not the one who said it. It's the author. So that's why my name is Joseph, you know. It's my husband's name. So you marry the man, you marry his people, you marry everything about him. He drinks, he smokes, he has whatever. You just cook. That's part of the show. And then here, okay, so this is what is going on here. Here you have Mireille's destiny destroyed. You have looking at infant Motila. What happened here? When she discovered, he said, Mireille and his friends kept calling her attention to what the things that he was doing, that this is wrong. And he said, Mireille, c'était pour prouver quoi? Ma virilité, ma capacité de séduire si aussi. Mireille, is to prove what? My virility, my masculinity, my ability to seduce whoever. Okay, so, and then finally, La Folie said she became mad. She ran mad because she could not cope with the emotional disquietness, which became a problem for the French government, and eventually her child died. Now, we have this theory here. It's theoretical framework Stewanism. And my brother has said it. I have since advocated the word Stewanism instead of feminism to bypass this consensus and to bypass the combative discourses that ensue whenever one raises the issue of feminism in Africa. Now, Stewa is about the inclusion of African women in contemporary social and political transformation of Africa. And it says, we are describing the actual conditions of African men. You are going to see this quick video here. Yeah, just a video slide. I'm rounding up.
Volume is coming or has come to Africa as a response to what was existing before Stewanism. Before Stewanism, more people were talking about feminism. In this way, Stewanism has been created as a response to feminism, as a way to present something that is taking into consideration African view, well of view. And in this case, Stewanism is not excluding men. It is not a fight against men. It is not a fight against the father, or against the husband, or against the brother. It is a view, a perspective of development that is including everyone. It is including everyone because no one should be excluded when we talk about development, especially in Africa, which is not very much developed, but to develop itself, it will need process from one walk of life in Africa. So Stewanism doesn't exclude men, but it is a defense to promote the women, but that promotion of the women, it is not done by excluding men.
Stewanism is a theory which foregrounds the African woman as being able to stand on their own, thereby overcoming challenges related to patriarchy and accepted social norms. These often keep women in oppressive and subjugated cultural spaces, for example, regarding the notion of female genital mutilation and gender violence. Stewanism is about overcoming and celebrating the power of African womanhood in relation to liberating gender spaces where women can be freed to thrive and to prosper. These new spaces can be tested against the old stereotypes that are represented by various authors in the African novel.
Really, from my understanding, particularly in terms of Africa, the theory or the concept of Stewanism really want to elevate and make us to understand shared humanity. And the concept of shared humanity linked to Stewanism means that we are all human and we believe in the concept of shared humanity.
Okay, we live in the concept of shared humanity. So I'll just go. I'd go to my conclusion. Okay, conclusion. Now, we have seen what Stewanism is. Overcoming challenges, shared humanity, part of Ubuntu philosophy. A person is a person through another person. And I'm saying in this book, for peace and harmony to reign in the society, there has to be the construction of patriarchy. Men and women should work together as a team to enhance social growth. We should endeavor to treat people rightly, regardless of sex, class, nationality, or race. Now, I have succeeded in working with these people. This is Professor Patrice Wepu, head of School of Languages, my supervisor, my spouse, who I could not convince to come here because I didn't give him chocolates. Because I would have pulled him, but no chocolate. And then this is me. I used to be a beautiful woman, PhD. And then this is Molara Leslie Ogundipe, the theorist, the person who advocated the theory of Stewanism. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are pleased to announce now to listen to Tahzeeb Akram and Jodi Bloem, the title of their presentation, The Inherited Toxic Masculinities and Forced Creation of Toxic Bodies in the Conservative Nigerian Landscape.
Before we start, I just want to change a few things. Our title is now Toxic Masculinities, Embodiment and Performativity in Inxeba's Graceland and Nigerian Landscape. For the purpose of this paper, we'd also just like to define a few terms, simply, honestly. Cross-dressing is an act of breeding the attire of the opposite sex. Transvestites are typically males who derive pleasure from dressing up as men. And drag queens are males who are female impersonators who create personas to portray a hyper-femininity. And many prominent Nigerian drag queens are going to be featured on the slide in the background.
Our research paper will explore the function of toxic masculinities in Inxeba's Graceland, as well as in Nigeria. In Gila Banks, The Masculinity in Nigeria, Rebellion versus Conformity and Power, she asked that when considering this novel, as well as Nigeria, that we, quote, imagine growing up in a country where the most important aspect of a boy's life is the measure of his masculinity, end quote. Abani's 2004 novel will be used as a primary literary source in this investigation, as protagonist Elvis Oke is torn between what his father thinks a man should be and what Elvis thinks a man can be. This paper will therefore investigate the conservative and patriarchal dominating forces of the country, which forces divergence between Nigerian bodies being true to their identity and the highly held enforced Nigerian morals, and how it stifles non-heteronormative masculinities, such as Elvis's, as well as the so-called marginalized male community. Alternative sexualities in Nigeria is highly unspoken of and infrequently written about despite their dominant existence. The boundary between unconventional, conventional, oppressive and liberated are challenged by the existence of these bodies.
Judith Butler argues that the theory of gender performativity presupposes that norms are acted on us before we have a chance to act at all. When acting, be it in new or unexpected ways, we are still merely reproducing the norms that are already predetermined for us, because these conventions precede and exceed us. She explains that when a child is gendered without knowing what is wanted of them, they find themselves trying to negotiate their existence. In Graceland, Sunday Oke tells his son, "You are not a man, and so this is only the voices of others speaking through you." Ironically, in pointing out that Elvis is being used as a tool for the more dominant masculinities present in their society, Sunday is inadvertently referring to himself, as he too uses his son as a silhouette on which to project his own perceptions of masculinity. Sunday's constant frustration at his son's inability to display his version of manliness is what leads to Elvis's own inner conflict. He is unable to identify what kind of man he is expected to be, since his father never explains it and instead just assumes that Elvis should naturally be the man, worthy of carrying the family name, of carrying on the patriarchal lineage, despite, as Christopher Omar argues, Albani portrays Elvis as having an affinity to feminine lineage.
Having witnessed Elvis constantly keeping company with female members of the family, Sunday finds it paramount that the 5-year-old immediately begin his induction into manhood. The only explanation Sunday gives to the perplexed Elvis is that it is time to cut your apron strings. After being painted with white and red dye, Elvis is handed a bow and arrow that a live chick is pierced on at the end of it, and told that he has just shot the bird, despite his protest that he in fact has not harmed the bird at all. Sunday then calls in the Igbo elders and shows them the arrow, indicating that the boy has successfully passed the first step of manhood. The elders then proceed to blow white chalk onto Elvis's face, and the ceremony is now complete, despite his father leaving out crucial aspects of the ritual. Due to this hasty approach to inducting his son into what should be a coveted and respectable process, Elvis does not fully embrace his father's masculinity, whether it be due to his innate nature or because of his father's inability to fully initiate his son into the patriarchal society. Instead of representing the importance of the male identity, the inaccurate and rushed ceremony highlights his father's deficient masculinity and the fickle traits and nature of patriarchy in the novel. It is something that can change according to the whims and fancies of the authoritative figures who hold the patriarchal power in their hands. However, growing up, Elvis witnesses another type of ritual, one that captivates him due to its careful and considerate method.
Growing up, Elvis loves watching his Aunt Felicia getting ready, as he is amazed not just at how makeup made her aware of herself, but by how much he wanted to wear that mask. He pesters his aunt to dress him up one day, convincing her to weave his hair into cornrows, apply lipstick, put on a dress and platform shoes, which he then plants as a body, happy, proud, and with his chest stuck out. Although only 9 years old at this point, Elvis is entranced by the other, which is the colorful and expressive feminine side. However, despite wanting to immerse himself in it, he quickly realizes that if he is ever to do this again, he will have to hide it. This realization hits him at the same time that his father's fist does upon the sight of his son dressed up as a daughter should be. Sunday immediately drags Elvis to the backyard and begins to shave his son's head in a desperate act to cut out the cornrows along with Elvis's femininity, offering once again a curt explanation, I'm only doing this for your own good, it's not easy to be a man. This forceful and dramatic attempt to counter the feminine with the masculine leads Elvis to search out happiness in anything other than the harshly manly aesthetic of his father.
The femininity Elvis's father stems from Elvis's loving memory of his mother, who dies of cancer early on in his life. After watching dancers perform to Elvis Presley's song, Elvis remembers his mother's fondness of the singer, hence his name, and he remembers dancing with her on the porch, listening to a constant loop of Presley records. This nostalgia causes him to begin dance lessons in secret, and in our obsession with American performers, he begins to view liberating masculinity as being synonymous with whiteness. Needing to counter the harsh masculinity surrounding him, and influenced by his mother and aunt, Elvis starts performing his own rituals, which he carries out in the privacy of his room.
Opening the box methodically with the air of ritual, he laid out the contents: powder, lipstick, eyeshadow, mascara, eye pencil, and a tin of Saturday Night Live, admiring the image on it of a white couple dancing. That was the life, he thought. Satisfied with the mix, he began to apply it to his face. As he concentrated on getting an even tone, his earlier body slipped away. He applied a hint of blue to his eyes, barely noticeably, but enough to lift off the white of his face. He pulled the wig on, bending to look in the mirror. He stared hard. What if he had been born white, or even just American? Would his life be any different?
Elvis finds happiness in his ability to express himself in ways that he sees the females and the street performers do. But that is not the way men should be, according to the males in his family, and he knows that to survive is to remain silent and repressed.
Not only is it important to stay silent in order to protect his own identity, Elvis was taught from a young age that it is a man's duty to stay quiet to protect the honor of other masculine figures. When confiding in his father about seeing Uncle Joseph raping his own daughter Fouad, Sunday places a gun to his son's head and gently tells him to never utter this information again. He is forced to remain silent when he finds out that the army are in the human trafficking business because they are the ultimate patriarchal heads in Nigeria. And he is also forced to repress his own trauma when his uncle rapes him in the church, in what should be the home of confessions. While in Graceland, silence is vital for the progression and sustenance of patriarchy, Elvis yearns to be in solidarity with those who are also silenced. Elvis is able to relate to the Nigerian transvestites and cross-dressers in the novel through their makeup. In this instance, however, he understands the negative implications that come with them expressing themselves in public. Admiring himself from many angles, he thought it was a shame he couldn't wear makeup in public. That's not true, he mentally corrected himself. He could like the transvestites and cross-dressers, but he would be a target of some insult or worse, physical beating, many of which were meted out by the police, who then took turns with their victims in the back of their vans. Elvis is conflicted in his battle of being true to himself and regarding Nigerian customs. It is clear that he longs to be like these cross-dressers and transvestites who are able to express themselves both in private and public. But the risk of violent and sexual brutality is too high for Elvis to surrender to his desire.
While Elvis has shown the sadistic and toxic versions of masculinity, it is undercut by the feminine and domestic inputs of his mother's diary, which he keeps hidden. This is considerably like Nigeria itself, which is a patriarchal and conservative nation, and although it is a duality itself in that masculine and feminine both exist, the former is allowed to exercise its dominance, while the latter is forced to be repressed and hidden away. In Nigeria, homosexuality is illegal, while cross-dressing is not. It is still punishable in some parts of Nigeria, specifically the northern regions, as it is seen as a gateway to homosexuality. In March 2008, a Nigerian court sentenced the man to 18 months in jail after he was found with women's clothing and makeup in his suitcase at an airport. Another 18 men faced charges of vagrancy and indecent behavior after they were arrested in a hotel for allegedly dressing as women. However, 10 years later, although the discussion regarding cross-dressing is more active, progress is slow.
This year, in episode 24 of the Nigerian talk show Inside Out, host Sandra Eze introduced the topic of cross-dressing, stating that it was important to address the issue in Nigeria. However, it did raise further debate when Eze referred to cross-dressing as a fashion trend. On the talk show, there were 4 panelists, the first being a female who considered herself androgynous, and that asserted that drag queens and cross-dressers were performing an act of extremism. This led the second panelist, Onyx Godwin Agaga, a gay cross-dresser, to explain that it is not a matter of being radical, but merely expressing oneself. In Graceland, when Elvis says dressed up, he's not performing an act of extremism, or rebelling against patriarchy. What he's doing is expressing his true nature. Fellow panelist and psychiatrist Dr. Adekbaji Daku then described his understanding of cross-dressing. He explained that there are 4 types: those who find it sexually stimulating, those experiencing physical identity conflict, those who are rebelling, and those looking for a comfortable aesthetic for their bodies. He also explained that in his professional opinion, a person raised by wolves will be a wolf by nature, and therefore a man raised in confinement with women will naturally be feminine, homosexual, and return to cross-dressing. In the novel, Elvis is essentially raised by 2 wolves, his uncle and his father, yet he does not become a wolf as he is aware of their vicious overriding nature and wants to maintain his flexible virtues. The final panelist was Dr. Namara, who provided the voice of the neutral, uncommon citizen. He argued that regardless of personal beliefs and emotions, we should all just accept and encourage people to be who they truly are in order for Nigeria to evolve. The notion that cross-dressing can be considered a form of extremism stems from any non-heteronormative act being a form of disowning the national Nigerian body, a body that patriarchy needs to enforce its stringent requirements on to uphold its values. He incited sympathy from the audience by asking why the nation felt it is necessary to hide those who are different, why mercy killings are seen as helpful while queerness is considered harmful.
One of the pioneers of drag queens in Nigeria was Area Scatter, a 1960s gender icon who walked the streets of his community as a woman. He lived his life unconfined to the stringent spaces relegated by imposing order, validating the belief that femininity and masculinity are not always behaviors that come from biology. His public exhibitions, a transgression of gender, was witnessed by many. Like the Igbo elders who passed judgment on Elvis's initiation, elders present at Area Scatter's performance are documented to have looked in awe. Elvis Area Scatter paved the way for future drag queens who have become famous through social media, the technological barrier providing exposure as well as protection from the public who do not agree with their presence in society.
These drag queens, many of whom feature on the slideshow, include Bobrisky, a social media star revered for his bleached skin, Dindeli Edun, an eccentric media personality, Charlie Boy, who revealed his female alter ego in the late 90s, and Olajide Salami, a Nigerian class racer, who said that being queer can be fraught with danger because some Nigerians still feel that being gay or drag queen is alien to their culture. And she wants to be a part of the force that helps Nigeria's progression, as it is her dream to one day perform at Gay Pride in her home country.
While these drag queens are both hated by conservative and loved by the more progressive side, cross-dressing, however, is not a Western ideal adopted by the country. In the northern part of Nigeria, bandodu, a term used to refer to men who dress as women, have been socially accepted in those parts of the country for centuries. Similarly, Gorjijin of Wolof expression translating into man-woman is a disparaging term used for effeminate males. It is specifically used for males who love dancing in public and enjoy spending time in the kitchen with females. As mentioned before, Elvis enjoys all these undertakings and therefore would be called Gorjijin. The term implies that all of which Elvis embodies, a male who is very close to the world of women, to a point of identifying with them. In Nigeria, men in the Hausa-speaking northern region who talk and act like women are considered Gorjijin. They perform their feminine social identities through bodily practices, including the work of cooking and selling food, and frequent women's talk. However, while these norms do exist in the country, Nigeria's division of states and multitude of different societies and cultures prevent a successful merging of the country's belief. Nigeria is still struggling to find a clear distinction in their reaction to cross-dressing or drag queens. The fear is that it is a gateway to liberating homosexuals, while others hope it could be. In Graceland's Nigeria, there is no solution for Elvis to be liberated. In Nigeria itself, there still remains no solution, but there is emergence of drag queens, cross-dressers, and the increase in social media attention provides a glimmer of hope, with a slow progression will eventually result in a gender-fluid society.
Yeah, I'm going to try to read something on behalf of someone. This is not my piece in any way, shape, or form. I don't even know the piece really. This is someone who couldn't be with us. His name is Siseko Kumalu, and he's in the philosophy department at Pretoria. And let me see if I can get my computer on, because I realized that I forgot to bring a mouse, and that's how I get my computer. So where is it? And that is it. Yes, but it's not going to probably control my. Oh, yes. Yeah, I need it to control my computer. Sorry about that. Let's just move this. Okay. Located. Okay, so again, this is Siseko Kumalu, and there's a small preface to the paper. We wish to express our deepest sadness for not being able to present this paper ourselves. He's talking about one person himself. He used to use his we in that way. Ourselves. However, due to funding constraints, we were unable to attend. In the same breath, we would like to express thanks to Janine Jones, that's me, for her willingness to present the paper on our behalf. The paper will appear with image and text, that particular journal. However, we were unable to raise the necessary funding from our institution to attend this meeting.
We would like to stress that there are a number of issues at play which inhibited our capacity to attend, chief among which was funding, which is used by institutional administrators as a way of disciplining particular bodies. This mechanism of disciplining bodies reproduces very specific conceptions of what philosophy is in this country. We would like, however, to once again thank Janine Jones for her willingness to present this paper on our behalf. So the paper, and you have to, he uses, I think some of the time he's writing in Zulu. I don't speak that, so I'm going to butcher things. I'm sorry, I don't speak either Zulu or Xhosa. In fact, I met someone just recently. He said, I'm sorry that you don't have a language. This is someone in Joburg who was Xhosa. And I understand what he meant. Yes. So this is called Inxeba, Inxeba, I don't know how you pronounce it, Interrogating Conceptions of Manhood, Sexuality, and Cultural Identity. And I'll read the abstract. Inxeba, the wound revived debates on Waluko and its attendant social discourses in South Africa. Elided by these debates, which saw the film censored from public view by the Film and Publication Board of South Africa, were formulations of manhood, which we maintain are rooted in culture, tradition, and custom. Formulations that frame homosexuality as abject in our context. Through delineating manhood from manhood proper, the first manhood was a capital N. Manhood from manhood proper, we argued that Inxeba revealed the nexus between manhood, policed sexualities, and cultural identity. In detailing the status of manhood proper, we critically unpack masculinity and challenge the factual position of manhood, with a capital M. The problematics which arise out of manhood are informed by a misconceptualized notion of this identity as stable and unchanging, creating dichotomous bifurcations of what constitutes being a man, a framework which is depicted and contested by the narrative of the film. Using feminist theory to interrogate culture, custom, and tradition, and its imposed silences on feminized bodies in contemporary South Africa, we reveal how Inxeba subverts and contests manhood through positioning manhood proper. So now I'm reading the introduction. We find ourselves, at the writing of this paper, defined as a queer black man and a black woman, respectively. So maybe, this is two people. I'm sorry, this is two people. That's why I say we. Okay, so not just some kind of strange we. The Siseko Kumalo, he didn't say this to me. And Mindukule, I don't know how you pronounce that, Bigama. She's also with the philosophy department in Pretoria. So perhaps she also did not receive funding for the same reason he gave before, conceptions of what philosophy is in this country. Okay, so there's two people that weren't able to come and speak their own paper. Okay. We find ourselves at the writing of this paper defined as a queer black man and a black woman respectively, definitions which are ascribed to us by social categories which necessitate a declaration of our intentions in the writing of this paper. We come to the writing of this paper spurred by the public debate, the contested definitions of manhood, constatations which found their genesis in the screening of Inxeba, The Wound, in South Africa cinemas in 2018. Owing to these constatations, we conceptualize manhood as a discursive tool marred by power dynamics and challenged meanings owing to our location, which situates us in the philosophical discipline, along with other definitions that are constantly shifting in how the concept is understood and applied in public discourse. Our objective, thus, is to attempt an understanding of the moral panic that characterized the public debate that ensued from the screening of the film. Ours is not to offer definitive prescriptions, as that would be a betrayal of our disciplinary allegiance. Rather, we are concerned with deepening our and the reader's understanding of why Inxeba was seen through the lens of social, moral, and cultural transgressions, which resulted in the film being banned from cinemas, even if briefly. This ban was characteristic of prescriptive positions which define the social, political, and economic conditions of possibility that permit one mode of life while denigrating another. The moral panic which characterized the screening of the film underscores how we define manhood proper and situates our use and analysis of homophobic discourse in South Africa. We define the concept as action as legislation, which transgresses the existing social norms in order to constitute new possibilities of being argued as by Arendt, Hannah Arendt. The denigration of one mode of life is further linked to the moral panic which characterized the screening of the film. In an attempt to uphold a factual fixed conception of manhood, culture, custom, and tradition framed in Inxeba and its attendant aesthetic as demeaning the custom of Mqolozana. In this narrative, the proponents of culture who wanted to silence and even expunge the film failed to realize how the concerted efforts at silencing the film were themselves a manifest expression of the erasures, modes of silencing and violences perpetrated against feminized bodies. We suggest, therefore, that from a philosophical interpretation of these conditions of possibility, what is required of the philosopher in an exercise into deepening understandings, subsequently expounding interpretations. The denigration of a mode of life defined as other is rooted in the South African context and for the purpose of our analysis in colonialisms that infantilize black masculinities, a point which complicates unilateral readings of masculinity as violence, to which we will return. Framing a discussion on masculinities from a philosophical predisposition foregrounds our aim of clarifying the status of manhood proper, necessitating the question, what is the social obligation of men if manhood is an essential element of being? This was by Lou, L-O-U-W. Lou's question catalyzes the notion of action as legislation, elevating manhood proper to the position of a functionary of the social and its attendant obligations. These obligations signify an alignment of aesthetics with the ethical, which denotes a relational life that is non-violent towards and or the other. This clarification contributes to our understanding of the moral panic which characterized the screening of Inxeba in and around South African cinemas. Furthermore, it clarifies the relationship between the ethical and aesthetics, which, as Cornell suggests, denotes a relational mode of being that is non-violent between the self and the other. In proffering a suggestion on the status of manhood proper, we begin by positing a working definition of the ontic status through revealing deceptive bifurcations which locate manhood outside of manhood proper. So that first manhood is with a capital N, the second with a small n. Manhood in South Africa, and more specifically in the Xhosa tradition, thus rests on specific reproductions of culture which perpetuate and maintain violent masculinities through ascribing to manhood notions of virility and sexual prowess. Further, ideological constructions of manhood substantiate the deceptive distinction between nature and culture, with the former being the space of women and the latter reserved for men, as argued by Ordner. From a feminist perspective, we maintain that manhood has been encountered and theorized as violence, so both of them, violent and violence, in the South African context, necessitating a consideration of manhood proper, which holds in tandem and in check identities premised on manhood. In our discussion, we complicate violent masculinities using Gupola's analysis, the difficult task of normalizing freedom. In this work, Gopola notes that masculinities in the South African context are contested, contradictory, and varied over time, thus complicating a binary understanding of violent masculinities through revealing that manhood proper, whose constitutive element is inclusive of manhood, was a rejection of the infantilization of blackness by colonial impositions such as apartheid. This rejection acted as a mode of ontological reclamation on the part of blackness from a self-referential perspective. However, as we showcase in our analysis, the act of rekindling black ontologies through heroism and bravado birthed the violent masculinities. In the first section, our concern is for the violent masculinities in South Africa, which are experienced historically and contemporarily through violence against feminized bodies. Our analysis of this violence allows us to interrogate while exposing how manhood and its implications of cultural identity and police sexualities births violent masculinities, thus necessitating that we foreground the false dichotomy that exists between manhood and manhood proper. A distinction that reveals and subverts the false dichotomy between manhood and manhood proper, as implicitly explored in the film Inxeba, requires that we contextualize our analysis in the historical narratives which create the contemporary dispensation. Black identity, both private and public, in the current dispensation, and is inextricably linked to historical conceptions of manhood proper in African cultures, which were undone by the colonial project and the infantilization of blackness during apartheid. A brief historical overview contextualizes South African social identities which continue to grapple with the dysfunctions, disjunctures, and discontinuities wrought by colonialism and apartheid with effects lasting to this very day. The second section considers the question of what was aesthetically displeasing about the film, which further substantiates our claim of a moral panic which accompanied its screening, resulting in its temporary ban from cinemas across the country. From this interrogation, we further highlight the nexus of manhood, police sexuality, and cultural identity, and its subversions in Inxeba, which explains the consequent social reactions which we frame as moral panic. Our analysis here moves from theoretical articulations that use Inxeba as a tool of theory generation to a discussion that considers the engendered meanings of an image. And I think that's where he wanted me to stop, because otherwise it's really too long. Well, no, one more small section. Can I go at a time? Okay, good. So this part, yeah, I stop after this part. Okay. This next section is called Waluko / circumcision, manhood, and manhood proper. Manhood, whenever I say manhood proper, it's with the small n. Whenever I just say manhood, it's with the capital N. Manhood in the Xhosa tradition is framed as the process of transitioning from boyhood to manhood proper, to isiko lokwaluka. This said transition happens via the initiation custom, which is understood as a continuous learning process into manhood proper. The specific event, isiko lokwaluka, is the liminal stage of the process wherein one enters as a boy and loses its identity to gain manhood proper. Through our discussion, we argue that there is a concerted effort on the part of those who wish to continue the tradition and preserve what is defined as an authentic process of attaining the ontological status of manhood in the cultural milieu of Xhosa identity. In the process of attaining an authentic status of manhood, cultural practices and tradition appeal to violences, such as the policed sexualities of feminized bodies, the exclusion of women in cultural practices, which create and recreate violent masculinities manifesting as manhood. In its ideal structure, the custom of Waluko teaches young men the values of discipline and integrity, while inculcating a laudable moral position which we understand here as manhood proper. The perception by which non-Xhosa speaking people has been that this practice is exclusively for men, given the nature of the rite of passage as we have detailed it above. The demarcation of this site of culture as a space for men alone is false. In substantiating this claim, we cite the discursive exclusion of women and homosexuals who are, however, part of the process revealing that this practice is not factually reserved for the cisgendered heteronormative male body. However, we wish to suggest through a discursive appraisal of the custom and contest the claim that the process of Xhosa initiation is both ontologically and linguistically male. In its use of masculinist language in the process of initiation, we maintain that misconceptions of the custom produce manhood, which is then inculcated in initiations, while bodies existing outside of these masculinist demarcations are disallowed from that cultural space. And disallowing these bodies from the cultural space would further find substantiation for the moral panic which characterized the screening of the film. It is from this analysis that we argue that Waluko, through social discourse, is exclusively preserved for men, albeit on premises which are false and are aimed at sustaining identities that are fixed, unchanging, and violent. Thus, manhood rests on specific reproductions of culture which perpetuate and maintain violent masculinities through ascribing to it virility and sexual prowess. We detail this virility using the dialogues in the film is an example of the prized social position that circumcised penis holds in cosmology. Our analysis draws out tensions between manhood proper and manhood. It's clarified through our detailed consideration of manhood, through delimitations that showcase how manhood is a constitutive part of manhood, small manhood. We posit an apparent tension between the two categories. Moulman's suggestion of manhood, which we maintain is what we witness performed undoubtedly, demonstrates how the male body oscillates between these two categories.
Thank you. That's not an easy task to present someone else's paper, and I guess it's also that easy because we can't ask you the questions. Anyway, now let's open the floor. Any questions for our presenters? And if anyone wants to ask questions to Khumalo and Sister Khumalo and Lindo Kuflegama, we can also email them. Please, anyone?
Yes, thank you very much to all the presenters on this session. I have a question for Marjorie, which would also have been a question for Siseko and Lindo, so it's just for Marjorie. No, it's for Marjorie and Joy. And then I have a slightly different question for Tahzeeb and Jodi. And my question is, okay, so in Marjorie, so
In the smile.
Marjorie, so, okay, Joy and Marjorie. The question is, I guess, so you present two novels that are very different, that present, it seems to me, a certain tension and a certain, okay, let me not say. So could you say something about not just what the novels present, but also something about what Ba and Mqolozana are gesturing towards, right? So because I mean, part of what makes novels is just they're not like, they don't just tell us stories, right? But they're also doing something. And of course, I mean, in these particular novels, by two writers who have a very clear and explicit political investment in certain critiques of power, right? So I'm very interested in your senses of, okay, so what is Ba? Because Ba is not just telling us a story about a man who married somebody and then like what is she doing in this novel? What is I don't know, what is. And in Mqolozana's case as well, so I'm thinking, for example, so you talk about how Lumkile battles quite significantly at the beginning. No, doesn't battle, is quite invested in hegemonic masculinity. But it seems to me that A Man Is Not a Man is also a novel that is very ambivalent at times, and sometimes subversive of, and sometimes confirming of hegemonic masculinity. And that in fact a big part of what you were reading is kind of the Lumkile who's undergoing ulwaluko rather than the Lumkile who writes the fictional biography, right? So I was just wondering what you think about so if you could say something about the literariness and what are the of those texts. And then for Jodi and Tahzeeb, because you answered this question, so I'm not going to answer the same question about what Abani is doing. But I was very struck by the many layers of intertextuality in your presentation as well, right? The visual, but also the various. And I was wondering whether, because you chose very specific imagery and moving imagery, and you only partially referred to it. So I'm assuming that it is doing more than background and contextual work. But of course you only had 20 minutes. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about how because you made certain choices about, and you didn't just have images that speak to it. So could you speak a little bit about? some of what you think that juxtaposition produces for you, and why it's productive for the work that you're doing. I don't know.
Maybe we start. Maybe we start. Marjorie, you were. If you want to answer, maybe.
She looks like she's
Jodi?
bursting.
It's not like a round of questions, right? So we can.
Okay, let me start by saying that I carefully chose this text because it's true it's West Africa, but it reflects what's happening in South Africa, where you have racial discrimination, white, black, and you have issues of migration. You see how people, when they leave, Ousmane left Senegal for France because he changed. How do I make, that's why we say he's an opportunist. Why, he left France for Senegal for France. Of course, he was going to study. Now, how do I make life better for myself? He chose to date, he carefully dated the daughter of a French diplomat for whatever reasons, maybe to get a resident permit, maybe to make his life better. And, when he succeeded, migration, and Muriel could be the opposite. Sorry, Ousmane can also be a woman where you get into a place, you change simply because you want to adapt or you want something extra. So that's why you see Ousmane is, marrying Muriel, changing, to get everything from her. And after he has succeeded, he brings her back and begins to display his true identity. It could also be the other way, that it is the woman who goes to the man, like in a book I was analyzing, it was not here, where she has to change just because he wants some social, I use the word social benefits in quotes. So it talks about issues of migration. When you leave and you go to the other place, the challenges you are faced, and then when you also leave that place and come back to another, so you have issues of migration. You also have issues of cultural indifferences. Now, the French society, well, in quote, it's a monogamous society, what individual. It's not like us in Africa where you don't have food, you have to share. She was not trained that way. So we are looking at two societies and the challenges that we could face when you leave your society and come to another person's society. And it is assumed that you should endeavor to adapt, which of course would cause problems. Muriel came to Senegal and it was assumed that she should integrate into a Muslim family. You should do this, you should do this. And that was where the conflicts came. So you have conflicts as a result of cultural differences, conflicts as a result of racial discrimination. Now what happened? If we go to the issue of language, it was not just that she could not speak the language of the people. There was something more. The mother-in-law was not interested in her. She said, I don't want a negress. I don't want a white woman. I want a black woman. Meanwhile, this woman came with a lot of things to make their own society better. And that's how some of us move to other societies to make some societies better and vice versa. And you are faced with all sorts of challenges. So it can be the man, it can be the woman, and she was rejected because she's the white woman, she's this, she's that, and that's how some of us are also rejected. You're either accepted or rejected. So you have cultural indifferences, you have racial discrimination, and you have the issues of language. What I do is, you know what I did? I'll tell you, when I get into a place, I crammed Isiposa, because I know that if I speak the language, I speak to your heart. Molol, Ngamala, Ngujoy, Ifeanyichukwu, Joseph, Ndibela, Nigeria, Ndipanda, Isiposa, Isi French, Rhodes, and then I speak it in the Lala, Nomieni Wam, Outlands, part number 4. You would listen to me. Because I first myself, you can say I just crammed everything in my head, so that I'm accepted. When I speak it, the person like, hey, what are you saying? Uti inina, Joy, what are you saying? I say, Mamela, no, Mamela is listen, Mamela. So these are the challenges that, Ba is trying to portray what the African society, just a little bit of what our society looks like. So it's not, Ousmane can be the woman, it can be either ways of the two characters that was portrayed in the novel. I think I want to stop there.
hope I answered the question. Well, for me, I think that there are quite a few things that he's gesturing towards. So the first one that comes to mind is just the idea of the failed man. So I think one of the things that we see towards the end is where I talked about where the elders embrace him and give him their respect. It's that whilst he's on the mountain, one of the things that he's told by a friend even before he goes there is that one of the things he has to remember is that he shouldn't land up in hospital. So one of the things that that Lumkile does whilst he's on the mountain, as mentioned, is that he perseveres. So he says, I'm not going to call for assistance, or if I'm going to call for assistance, I'm going to follow the protocols of how we're supposed to do it. So I'm going to wait for a government-appointed nurse, or I'm going to call for my grandfather. When all these things don't work out and his grandfather and uncle don't show up and the government-appointed nurse don't show up, he still perseveres to the point that he says, I'm not going to the hospital, because if I do, then I am a failed man. But he does end up in the hospital, and whilst he's in the hospital, he now takes this time to self-reflect on, okay, what is it really that is a failed man? I have gone to the mountain, I have gone through all the protocols, I've gone through the transition phase, but what happened with me is that, my limb that got deformed, but I still persevered. So does that still make me a failed man? So I think that one of the things that for me the author wants us to question is, what is a man really? So, and who gets to really some words, but do you know what I mean? Who gets to decide that? So for me, that's one of the things. And then also the other thing is, as well as you said, ambivalent. It is sometimes subversive, and at times he does also kind of, because towards the end of the novel, he leaves, because he had moved with his mother into the Eastern Cape, but towards the end of the novel, he then leaves the Eastern Cape and goes back to Cape Town. And one could argue that it's still that even though he's self-reflected and he's on this journey of healing, he's still living in shame in that he can't really stay in this place because he still feels that he's not truly a man. So it's one of those things that I feel like the author is saying that journey is one that someone has, like it takes a long time for one to fully heal, because he's still, even though he's moved to Cape Town and he's now studying and now he's helping even initiates, he still doesn't see himself as worthy of being a man, because he doesn't associate with Amakosa boys. He doesn't talk to them. He says that he makes relationships with people outside of this culture because he doesn't want to have to explain himself. So I do agree that it's almost ambivalent, because you see this person who's sort of saying, I'm on this process of healing and I'm saying I'm a man in my own right, but then at the same time I'm still ashamed because still I don't have that mark of manhood. So it's so I think also so I think the author is trying to show like this journey of healing is one that's not, it's not clear cut, it takes a while. So I don't know if I've answered
that. There was a lot that we had to cut out from here because this alone was overtime. So we had to cut a lot out, like the colonial mentality, the Sharia law, and the book itself it's such a violent text that to sort of counter it, we just would have the end goal of what we want Nigeria to accept on display throughout the whole talking. And also because it's not, Christopher Byrne also just sort of, he mentions how they suffer, but he also brushes it over because it's more important to focus on Elvis and being the man that he needs to be. And there's a lot of...
I also wanted to illustrate the fact of when he mentioned how cross-dressers and drag queens in Nigeria, they have this protection barrier with social media where it's not only private, it then becomes public too, but then they're allowed to do it in public because it's technology which is allowing them. So I think also then to ask, are they really able to do it because they have that protection?
And we both come from places where if a man walked down at the street and died, it would just be another day. Like, you'd be amazed, you'd be happy, you'd take pictures, but it wouldn't be something that everyone started writing against. And we can safely show those pictures here, because it's not something that can be openly showed there. So, just
Another round of questions.
Oh, can I ask a question? Yeah, okay. I wanted to... Oh, no. I wanted, since I can't answer the questions. Yes. No, I wanted to ask on the end to you about that question. So the first one is again about the novel, and I just wondered, are there features in the novel, or is there any reason, any kind of way? I mean, I understand that you want to go from this novel about these particular individuals to some kind of ideas about structures in certain places in Africa, perhaps this context. Is there anything in that novel that helps us see the link between those particular individuals, that level of individuality, and what we should then extrapolate and understand it on a larger structural, systemic level? So that would be the question. And then to you, the question is shorter. I wanted to know, is there a difference in either in the book or in your idea of the book, between being a failed man and then simply just failing to be a man? I mean, the second one, it might be that you mess up and you're still a man, but you're a failed man. The other one, you're not a man. And so I just wondered whether is there an ambivalence there in the book, or is it there, or I'm just wondering. So those are.
PJ also has a question?
Yes, I do. It's for Jodi and Tahzeeb. I was wondering, in I don't know, in the novel, it's more contemporary, right? So do they make any references to, I don't know, in my head I'm thinking, I can't remember which play it was, but they talk about the traditional healer who dresses up in Nigerian culture. He dresses up, and it's a full-on dress. It's beautiful. There's like lots of other things happening, and it's a public thing. It's a public demonstration of this dressing up, but obviously it's a ritual, it's a ceremony. Don't they make any parallels between that sort of public dressing, when it's okay to dress up in that way, and when it's not okay to dress up as a man and then just stay in the private space? I don't know, for me the visuals between the public performance and dressing up and being celebrated as part of a ritual, and the ritual of being a drag queen dressing up to get ready for just to be indoors. I don't know.
We were going to play a part of the document, I think, of what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Because we found that when we were looking at feminine men in Nigeria. But there's nothing in the book that links that, and we're starting to bring it into the paper as well.
Yeah.
Because it just doesn't refer to that.
It would be an interesting link to make in your argument with that celebrated public dress up. Yes, for a ritual, but he's literally wearing a dress with lots of beautiful colors, and there's hair, there's all of that, you know, which in its sense, drag queens dress up is beautiful, and I don't know, those two parallels maybe. Yeah.
We have 2 minutes for your last answers, please.
I hope I'll be able to answer, but I don't want to repeat myself, and I want to be very diplomatic in my speech. If you see this book, I said white, black. In our society, even after apartheid, we still have, I am a white, she's a black. You know what I mean? Black on one side, white. Even when it looks like everything is fine. You know what I mean? But you could still see that hidden, I use the word hidden in quotes, racial discrimination. And in trying to discriminate, you might be cutting short your own destiny because the other person has something to offer. And that's why I talked about shared humanity, the Ubuntu philosophy. A person is a person through another person. So my point here is, it is blood that flows through everybody. Whether if you put the blood, her blood, my blood, you're not going to be able to distinguish if it's white, if it's black. So hegemonic masculinity should, disencouraged. Because at the end of the day, if we're not able to solve the challenges in our small space, it becomes a national problem, and it goes beyond to become an international problem. Because when Mirel became mad, the police came, the embassy now became Senegal, and the French government, for a problem that if we were able to manage properly, it does not escalate. And that's why we try to solve first from the home before it goes to, other places. So I want to leave it at that. Like I said, this is a woman's space, and I say it openly. I was discriminated against. A black, after here, she's a black woman. She's a black woman. And that's why I said, does a woman wake up one morning to become ash? Each time I'm like, she's black. So it was only after I just tried proving myself. This is the 5th conference I'm attending this year. And after that, the person who used to say she's a black woman shook my hand and gave me a book. But see the fight, see the struggle. They kept saying me black woman. Can she be so bright? Black woman, she's a black woman. What about it? So we're all humans. Thank you.
I just want to know that I got the question right. It's different. You asked the difference, if there's a difference between a failed man and being a fool, like in the failed man.
Is there a difference between someone who is a man but he's a failed man and then failing something, and so after that you're simply not a man? Period. You might not be a woman either, you might be considered nothing.
Yeah.
Is there a difference? Is there a difference is there any kind of
yes, I think there is in the novel.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
I'm just struggling with how to frame it because I don't know if I'm going to answer it right.
Oh, I don't know for right. I just wanted to.
Yeah, I think so. I think for me, I think the distinction he makes especially is with in incorporating the negligence of the elders. And I think that's where he kind of wants people to have that discussion and to have that debate. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if anyone on the floor wants to help with that as well. But for me, it's the distinction with the elders because they're the ones who are negligent in their duties. So yeah.
A very, very last one.
No, not a question. She said if someone else wants to add.
If someone else wants to add.
I can add.
You can also take it to the tea break. If you want.
Just in response to that question. Well, yes, there is, because it's I mean, there are differences between constructions of different masculinities, so it's a context of masculinities, and so even the failed man is a man in some masculinities within the same social milieu, but not fully in others. So it's not about being a man or not being a man. It's about different recognitions and different kind of concentric circles of masculinity with different kinds of texts. So it's about passing in many ways.
In which context you are.
Yes.
Right, okay. Which might be why he, in some contexts, he felt like he could be with people, and in others,
he couldn't.
Right, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much to all of the presenters. We are having